Organization Thrive. Today, I have the great pleasure of Charlotte Dewhurst. Welcome, Charlotte.
Thank you, Julian. Good to be here.
Yes, good to see you and good to hear you. I'm just going to introduce you to the audience. You're an experienced global marketing professional with a passion for people, which we're going to come on to later on. And you're currently the Senior Director for Group Marketing for RS Components. And you've had over 16 years of marketing experience in the world of retail, food, leisure, and technology, and sort of brands like ClearScore, Les Mills International, Argos, Reebok, and Morrison's, just to name a few very big brands there. And you have a purpose about making a difference in people. And interesting, looking around and nosing around, learning more about you. People seems to be quite at the core of who you are and what you talk about. So that'll be interesting to explore. So just as I always ask everybody on the show, because I'm nosy and curious, is what do you love about what you do, Charlotte?
Well, you just mentioned it. My purpose is making a difference to people. And it just so happens that what I do and what I've done for the past probably 10 years now in leadership roles allows me to do that on a daily basis. And I suppose it works on two levels. As a marketeer, I'm driven by making a commercial impact. And so that's about driving change through, changing processes, ultimately making a difference to the customer, which is incredibly motivating and kind of why I fell into marketing. But, you know, the leadership that underpins that is about making a difference to people. And that might be helping somebody on career trajectory. It might be giving someone some feedback that they've never had before. It might be lending a listening ear to somebody that might be expressing a challenge. And so, yeah, I'm really fortunate actually in that what I do allows me to do that on both levels on a daily basis, and it leaves me very fulfilled.
And when did you realize that your purpose was about making a difference with people? I mean, has that been early on in your career, or has that been a recent sort of revelation?
It was around the time I was at Argos, and I started to do some deep work with an executive coach myself. And there was a course that was running at the time called Leading with Purpose, and a number of people had been through that course and kind of found their purpose. And I didn't actually go on that course at Argos, but I said to my coach, well, what do you think my purpose is? And she was really great, actually. She kind of took the pressure out of the situation and said, you know, you're not going to scramble to find it in this session. Let's think about it over a period of time. And actually what we did was thought about the consistency in my life. So what's the theme around what's driven me to do something? And, you know, whether that's a mentoring relationship that I started at Morrison's that, you know, I now have as one of my closest friends who, you know, I speak to most days, or whether that's, you know, that tough piece of feedback that I give somebody in the workplace, or whether that's having a difficult conversation with a friend, or whether that's doing something for a close family member. I kind of connected the dots with the theme, which is I always feel great when I've done the right thing by people and when I've made a difference, even if that feels uncomfortable for me. I know that I'm on purpose, and that's how I discovered it, really, was just looking at what the commonalities were around when I felt really great about myself. And that's what drives me. And, you know, if it's not at work, if it's at home, it's really permanent. You know, it's on a Saturday, it's on a Sunday, it's in the morning, it's in the evening, it's any time. You know, this is on purpose for me because it's hopefully making a difference to people. So it was just very reflective, but then it came to me clearly, and it really guides me.
That's great. And it sounds really obvious, doesn't it, that if you're in leadership, you have a people focus about you, or you're in leadership, you like people, like dealing with people, but actually it's not so obvious. And I look back and over the last 18 months, and I think I reflect on sort of types and styles of leadership. And I think empathetic leadership and more human-centric, whatever has become more to the forefront. And I just wonder what your thoughts are on that, and why do you think it's become more of a thing to be pursuing now?
I think it's a great question, and I might be wrong, but I think probably over the last 5 to 10 years, more organisations have felt comfortable with encouraging people to be themselves. And at best, most people do care about other people and do want to make a difference. And so if I think about when I started out, when I was talking to various businesses around graduate schemes, there was very solid values and behaviours that, I actively thought, right, I need to adopt those behaviours and be exactly like that at work. And, I'm fortunate enough to work in an organisation now that encourages people to be themselves, and certainly spent some good time in organisations like ClearScore, another great role model example of an organisation that just says, as a leader, be yourself. And I think that's a great move on the part of organisations, because what they're doing is encouraging people to not be cookie cutter. And there can be values that drive and guide those behaviours, but encouraging people to feel confident that they can be human. And that's a massive move, I think, that's coming through in the past 5 to 10 years.
Yeah, and I think this 18 months, it's been quite a struggle with people, hasn't it, in terms of working from home, and people have been furloughed. I mean, there's been a whole host of stuff going on, people's mental health. It's been quite challenging, really. And as a leader, and as you joined an organisation, and I believe today is your first day in the office.
Yeah.
How's that? I mean, that must have been really, really weird, that sort of whole just onboarding in a remote world, and then suddenly you're joining people 8 months, 10 months later, whatever it is, in person.
Yeah, it's been really weird, to be honest. I think the hardest thing was that it's hard to build trust remotely. And I come to this engagement, my team engagement, my work with trust for others. But, the team that I'm leading, team of 35 people, had just been through a period of really intense change that was relatively hard for them and hard for the organisation. And there'd been a number of different leaders who'd been their boss over the past few years. And the hardest thing for me was realizing that people they can't take you at face value when you're only meeting them on Teams and speaking to them. That needs to be a physical human connection. So the hardest part was in the first 3 to 4 months, when I wanted to show up as my true self, and I wanted to demonstrate that I care and that I'm dialed into people, and that I want to listen and I want to make a difference. And clearly the words were not enough in certain cases, and that it really took to have those physical interactions. I've been lucky enough to go out for a couple of team lunches, socially distanced, sitting outside, and then today just meeting a few people. It's so different. And I think that's something that I always took as implicit, which is you meet somebody, you connect, they see who you are. Well, that has been more difficult over Teams, but I've been lucky enough to just be so well received, and generally for people to want to invest that time in getting to know me. And I said to my team the other day, no wonder we all find it so hard, because as soon as we start to pop our head out, as I've done today, and go into the office and have real conversations and not have to book meetings in and just have that kind of over the desk conversation, it's just so different. And you don't realize it when, for me, I joined in December, and you're sitting there thinking at the end of a long day, well, I've had 10 meetings, but how's that been? How's that gone? You've got no sense check on that. So it's been weird, I think, is my summary. But
and going forward, I mean, you hear organizations, I mean, I won't name them, but people that's been in the press where, the whole no jab, no job, and some challenges to, before that came out, it was all about, you've got to be in the office by September the 1st, or all that sort of stuff. And so this last 18 months, people have got used to this hybrid working, flexible working, and everything else. I wonder what your thoughts are on that. Not much about the company you work for, but just how, as a leader, we should be approaching this, and how we should be engaging our staff, rather than being quite, come here or don't come here, to almost vice versa type of thing.
Yeah, it's a really good one. I think for me, the key principle is to treat people as individuals and not make assumptions. So I think it'd be easy to broad brush people into certain demographic groups, and assume that, you know, because somebody's under 25 and they live in London and they should work in London, then, do you know what, they want to get straight back into the office. Well, that's not necessarily true. They might not. They might have a vulnerable relative at home. They might have a health condition themselves that makes them vulnerable. They might just be really anxious about coming back into the world. You know, getting on the train this morning for me was really scary. It's the first time I've stepped on a train for 18 months, and that's a big deal. And so I think fundamentally, to bring the human angle back, it's just about treating people as humans, as individuals, and acknowledging that, you know, everybody has their own anxiety and their own comfort zone, and as much as possible we need to respect that. Now, I work in an organization with 7,000 people, so it's really difficult to do that, but what I'm trying to do with my team is just have that open conversation about the future, talk through what that might look like, and we'll find some common ground about the days that we might want to be in the office and what we might want to do, and not set anything in stone. I think is also important, because things might change with people, things might change with the organization, things might change with the macro environment. So just letting people feel the space, I think, is really important at this point, and letting people know that it's okay to be anxious, and you know, really within reason, we need to respect their terms. At the same time, we need to make sure that as and when the business and the company and the world goes back to normal, that we put a framework in place that feels like it's moving back towards some form of normality, because I think we can both see this thing could just go on and on and on and never finish. So yeah, human, lots of reviews, lots of open conversations, and acknowledging that everyone's individual.
And it's interesting, isn't it? It's not rocket science, is it really? And in terms of its value in people, who they are, knowing that people have anxieties, have different perspectives, different challenges, and it's recognizing that. And I think I know we get caught up in policies, and we get caught up in achieving the business goals and everything else, which are all obviously important. But actually, we just sometimes need to stop a bit, pause a little bit, take a bit of time. And I think I'm encouraging organizations not to rush things a little bit, sort of take a bit of time out, reflect on things before you think is that the right strategy? Well, just take some time out. And almost, if you consider the human at the center of it, all of it, then, you know, making sure we can't consider every scenario, clearly, I appreciate that, but we can consider holistically how we go about this in a right way. And as long as the intent is there, people will feel that anyway, won't they?
Yeah, definitely. And you know, today's been a great example for me of just acknowledging that the past 18 months has been traumatic, and we haven't always felt that when we've been, you know, we've all been in different situations, but when we've been working from home, or we've gone into a different routine, and we've been great as human beings, we've adapted so much. And I think it's also really important to recognize in our teams and in those human interactions that it's been really difficult. Many people might not realize that today or tomorrow, but, you know, there has been trauma there for a lot of people, and how we create space to work through that, I think, is really, really important.
So knowing that having a focus on human leadership is a good way to lead, is a good approach. Firstly, what would be the skills and sort of mindsets we need to sort of develop to create that in a leader? If you were to sort of share your own experiences, your own insights, what would that be?
I think there's something around low ego. So I think it's really interesting when often leaders will kind of use terms like, you know, this person works for me, or this person's in my team. And, you know, that's fine, and that's part of the vernacular. But I personally try and avoid those types of phrases, because I like to think that the people who work around me, whether they are in my team or perhaps I'm reporting into them, or they might be my peers, we work together to achieve something. And I think it's about that kind of lack of ego, that lack of needing to be the most important person in the room. I've found that if you adopt that approach, then that helps to create mutual respect. It almost, it is counterintuitive, but by being ego-less, people tend to respect you more. And it's something that's come quite naturally to me over the past few years, but I always when I've been in office environments, not recently, but I always observe others and notice, I think, when there's ego at play. I think empathy is another really important one, which sounds quite straightforward, but just really trying to understand other people and, what's driving them. And I think sometimes people can respond in a certain way. They might be erratic, or they might be perceived to be rude, or they might not even be doing a great job. And for me, this is where my coaching qualification comes in, which is just really dialing up that curiosity rather than the judgment. So instead of, I don't know, person X is not delivering and they seem to be unmotivated, instead of kind of judging them and thinking, well, they're not performing, I need to deal with that, there's more of a curiosity dial up. Well, I wonder what's going on with them at the minute. Is there some questions that I can ask them that will help them to leverage my support? And that's not about crossing a personal boundary or asking them to disclose anything that they might not be comfortable with, but it's about letting them know that I understand them and I'm interested in them as a person. And so sometimes putting that very human, personal agenda on the table is a really important thing to do within the comfort zone of the person you're having the conversation with, of course.
I really like that low ego aspect, that almost creating a we run and these are my team, and that just difference in mindset and approach changes everything, doesn't it? Your perspective on your team, you see them more about how you can serve them, how you can help them, how we as a team can win together, and it just changes the dynamics, doesn't it, massively? It's
been so powerful for me, and I think also kind of it allows me to be more playful in my leadership style, because I'm not sitting in a room to be the formal boss or the person that is perceived to be leading the pack. I can be really playful and really fun with the team, which is something that is a personal value for me, something that previously I've had to work quite hard at. So it's great to now have that space to be able to have a bit of fun, to connect on a personal level, to not always be the person that's driving the agenda forward, but be the person that acknowledges that we're human beings, we need connection, we need to feel great about what we're doing. And I've been inspired by some leaders that I've worked with that have really helped me to feel that way. And I guess along the way I've picked up bits and bobs and adopted that style on my own. But it's so freeing to have this ego-less or low ego, don't pretend I'm ego-less, but low ego approach, because it's just it just demonstrates so much trust and respect for others, and that just comes back in droves, I've found.
Yeah, and it's why we have teams, and I think often leaders get caught up with themselves, and you wonder why. Well, they have a team just to serve them, but it's not about that. Just taking on the flip side of this, does this mean that you're a pushover and you don't have those tough conversations because you're all about low ego and empathy and all those soft, nice words and compassion and everything else? Are you an easy boss in that sense?
It's a good question, and maybe you should ask my team. I don't know.
I don't. No.
I think there's a really interesting dichotomy here, whereby yes, you can be human and you can be playful and empathetic, and you can be all those things that hopefully make people feel great about coming to work in an environment where you are organisationally the leader. But clarity is something that I really value, and in terms of what I think is one of the most important elements of leadership, it is clarity. And so I will always set clarity for my team about what I am expecting from them in terms of really clear KPIs, really clear objectives. I will always give feedback, and I often seek permission first to give that feedback, to say, look, do you want me to give you feedback while we go on this journey? And I actually don't think I've ever encountered anyone yet that said, no, I don't. They all seem welcome, like they're welcoming feedback. So essentially, if I set clarity and I seek permission to give feedback, and they say, yeah, I want the feedback, I want to go on this journey, I want to improve, or I want to do a great job, whatever that is, it allows us to have those really candid, open conversations. And so, I prefer to weave feedback in on a regular basis, make it part of a really natural conversation, reinforce that clarity on a regular basis, really steer and direct the team and the individuals to make sure that they're focusing on the right things. And I guess it's not being so linear as to say there's a difficult conversation and there's an easy conversation. I think it's about creating a bit more of a grey area in the middle that says they're just human conversations. And so if that conversation starts with a conversation about family or the weekend or recipes, I love to cook, so I love to talk to people about cooking and food. And then it ends in a place which is, do you know what, we've got 4 key objectives and there's 3 of them that are not going great, so let's have a chat about that. That's fine. I think that's great. I think it's when you put difficult conversations off, or when you segregate them, or when you make them the binary opposite of empathy, that it gets difficult. So I try and be consistent. I try and set clarity. I try and set an expectation that by leading, I set a high example for myself, and that means that I set a high example for the people who work around me. And so far, that seems to have worked quite well. But I understand that there is a paradox there, and I'm acutely aware of it.
Well, no, and I like your reframe as in terms of, difficult conversations versus easy conversations. Just put more in the middle of a continuum of a relationship. It's conversation, isn't it?
And that's how we are at home, isn't it? We'll have a conversation with our partner or our parents, and they'll have really familiar, playful, friendly elements to them, and they might have really difficult elements in the same conversation. But what we wouldn't do at home is save up a really difficult conversation for once every 6 months in a review and, just talk small talk outside of that. And that's the type of leadership that I can't identify with, where it's box ticking and process driven leadership. No, I
agree. And also if we term things tough conversations, we're telling our psyche, get ready, it's a fight, it's a flight. We start getting into that, and we start then making sort of mistakes in our behaviors and what we say, because we get nervous. We're almost creating ourselves to almost psyched up for it. So actually, through a relationship, it's just a conversation through boundaries. I guess just taking that bit further on the sort of conversations you may have, where there may be, I guess, underperformance and something you've addressed at some point. How would you go about underperformance? Because that's things that happens, and it does take straight talking in a sense, but how do you deal with that in your approach to leadership?
For me, it comes down to setting clarity in the first place. So I think as a leader, the most servant thing we can do for the people around us is to give them clear expectations of what's required. And that's not just in terms of what we want them to deliver, it's how we want them to deliver it. So I'll always say to people who work around me, best thing to know about me is no surprises. So if you haven't done something, or if something's not going well, please just let me know, and then I can support you rather than finding out about it from someone else. So I think that clarity piece is really, really important up front. And then I think the ongoing contracting, which should happen on an hour by hour, minute by minute basis, to say, are you committed to this relationship, to actually both commit to give feedback? I seek feedback from people who work around me as much as give feedback. I seek constant feedback. And so creating that culture of very dynamic, open, in the moment feedback, making that really comfortable. And I acknowledge that everybody's not comfortable with that, but making it as comfortable as they can be. And then underperformance becomes something that's not kind of over here in a really lofty, scary subject. It just becomes part of a natural steering through a course of delivering great work. And, that can be daily corrections, or that can be, with some people, they say, look, tell me in the moment. And with others, they'll say, well, let's sit down on a monthly basis and let's go through the behaviors that I'm particularly working from and let's work through that. There's others, of course, who might not be so aware of the fact that underperformance is an issue. And that's a difficult conversation in itself, because I believe it's a leader's role to raise that awareness. And again, that starts with the clarity, and it starts with the commitment to have that tough conversation to help them see that gap.
Mm.
And feedback, whether it's feedback from me, feedback from them to me, but feedback from third parties is also a great way to do that when there is that gap in awareness, just seeking some third party feedback and letting other people's words be thought provoking, I suppose. And again, that's where my coaching comes in, where you can look at words and phrases and with that person say, isn't that interesting? What does that mean to you? And often it's that ability to hold a mirror up to them that perhaps hasn't happened to them before, that is so revelationary for them.
Yeah, and I like what you said about that. The onus is on leadership to make that awareness. I think all leaders think, well, they should know what they're doing. They should be aware of that. Yes, we're all striving to be more aware of each of ourselves, but actually it's the leader to bring the mirror out in the conversations, in the words, and to highlight the blind spots in a way that's empowering and sort of motivating as well, isn't it? That's really important. Just before we,
that's the harder option. I think it's so important for leaders to dig deep in the need to have those conversations. There's so many opportunities where I've been about to go into a conversation like that, where someone is perhaps less aware of the gaps in their performance. And the easiest thing to do would be to have a really polite, cursory conversation about X, Y, and Z on the agenda. Thank you very much. Have a nice evening. Goodbye. But it's that digging deep and that commitment to have that radical candor, I guess, of, there's a gap and let's explore that gap together and create an environment that's not one of blame and judgment and fear, but one of curiosity, again, where I can help unlock, hopefully, some new learnings for them and help create a plan around that.
I remember once I created a competency model, and it was a scale of, I think, 1 to 5, and everybody had to sort of judge themselves where they were on the various sort of metrics, and obviously I would do the same. I was the sort of boss, and this one individual had scored 5 and everything, which is interesting, and it made me smile, and I said to them, okay, so instead of saying, oh, this I've got you this, and we have this little battle, because it was, I think he saw it as a negotiation, I think, unfortunately, but I just said, oh, just tell me, how are you, what evidence do you have at various levels? And as he started to go through it, you could see the sort of penny drop. I'm not quite there, am I yet? I said, no, it's not about, it's just, we want to have a gap because we want to develop you. That's the whole point of this. It's the purpose of developing you for the next, thing. Yeah. And it was interesting, me just asking a few questions, and he just realized himself and went, all right, yeah. And then he changed it all. And then we had a very good, healthy conversation about where he wants to develop. So otherwise he was nothing to develop because he was perfect.
Yeah. And I bet that felt great for you.
Yeah, no, it was good. It was very good. And it diffused something that could have been quite antagonistic. Because I go, well, I think you're a 3 and battling away, and that just wouldn't be very helpful at all.
Well, that's what I was thinking, earlier on in my career, there was certain situations where I was certain I was right and someone else was wrong. And it felt really difficult to be in that kind of engagement, whether that was, upwards, downwards, sideways in terms of stakeholder management. But as I've learned to be more of a human leader, and undoubtedly coaching has helped with that, I think it's just taking the pressure off in those interactions and letting go of the assumption that I'm right and this person's wrong, and just giving yourself some space to explore it with them. And it sounds like that's exactly what you did, and it led to a great outcome.
Yeah, just a question can be better than a statement, can't it, sometimes? Yeah. That's what I often say. Come in, just ask a question, and you'd be surprised what can come out of it. Just before we finish, what would be your, just as we, navigate as we go forward with still uncertainty, there is still uncertainty out there, what would be your one tip of advice to a leader in organizations going forward, how to sort of manage and navigate that uncertainty?
I think if you can identify a purpose without going through any kind of leadership courses or lofty thinking, just thinking about who you are and what drives you and when you feel great, that will help you navigate the uncertainty, because it will help you stay focused and motivated and on purpose and on message. I think the other thing I would say is don't be afraid of feedback. I worked in cultures where senior leadership would never seek feedback, and again had the gift of working in an amazing organisation, ClearScore, where everybody sought feedback all the time, and we had an amazing HR system called 7Geese, which allowed anyone to give anyone spontaneous feedback and anyone to ask the whole organisation for feedback. And I think, when we're navigating uncertain times, what better time to seek feedback from people who you're leading, who you're reporting into, who you might sit near or have sat near and not necessarily interacted with. I think it's a gift, and I think that can help to steer and guide us and make sure that we do stay true to ourselves, stay low ego, stay humble, stay human, and make sure we're putting people first. So yeah, anyone should seek feedback and interrogate it with curiosity.
Yeah, that's definitely true. That's important, and it's that whole thing of people think leaders should know everything. Actually, it's good to say I don't know. I'm not so sure here. Can you give me feedback into this situation, because I need your support or need your input. It's okay to be comfortable with not knowing, really.
Yeah, and you can learn so much from other people. That's why I'm so keen to listen to your podcast, to look at your work, to engage with other leaders in conversations like this, because I'm relatively early on my journey, and I recognise that I learn things from people, both what to do and what not to do every single day. And I think you're absolutely right. I think there's a old school thought that, I've been given this leadership position and I've got a team to lead, and I'm never going to ask a question and I must know everything. And actually it's the opposite of that. And again, that's where the lack of ego and brilliant organisations are giving people permission to ask those questions and be themselves and raise their hand where they're not sure, because that's definitely the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Just before we finish, how can people get in touch with you and connect with you? What's the best way of doing that?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, so you'll be able to click the link in this conversation. And I also have a website, so charlottedewhurst.co.uk, and you can see some of my writing and experience and background and other contact details on there.
Well, Charlotte, thank you for coming on today. Really appreciate talking with you. Loved your insights. I love how you lead. It's very inspirational, and I'm sure it's making a huge impact with what you're doing.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I've really enjoyed the conversation.